When Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses, he wasn't comparing the clergy to your local Seattle tweaker. He was diagnosing a system where belief functions less as a truth and more as a treatment. An opiate doesn't cure suffering, it numbs it, making the pain survivable without ever asking why the pain exists in the first place. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx argues that religion emerges from material suffering under capitalism, but then turns that suffering inward, reframing it as moral persistence instead of systemic flaw. As Marx and Engels write, that culture, the loss of which he laments, is, for the enormous majority, a mere training to act as a machine. Belief in this sense becomes dear to the people while conditioning them to accept their position in the system rather than challenging it. This is where the idea of a false consciousness comes in. Lewis Tyson defines this as when an ideal functions to mask its own failure, and whose real purpose is to promote the interests of those in power. According to Marxist theory, false consciousness occurs when the working class internalizes the ruling class's ideology, mistaking structural exploitation for personal destiny or divine will. Religion offers the proletariat meaning and comfort, but at a cost. It only soothes their suffering while preventing class consciousness, redirecting their anger upwards towards God or inward toward the self instead of outwards towards the system. Welcome to the Critical Theory Cafe, where today we'll be serving the hardest pills to swallow. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx argues that religion functions as an ideology that suppresses revolutionary awareness by transforming material suffering into moral value, producing a false consciousness that works against collective resistance. This process is exhibited in Fiddler on the Roof, where Judaism reforms shared class oppression into sacred boundaries that block proletarian solidarity in the Pale of Settlement, and in The Great Gatsby, where the American dream operates as a secular religion grounded in rugged individualism, misconstruing structural inequality as personal failure and preserving capitalist ideology. Fiddler on the Roof takes place in the Pale of Settlement, where Jewish villagers live under poverty, legal restriction, and constant state violence. Importantly, Jewish villagers aren't the only ones suffering there. Russian Christian peasants in the Pale face many of the same material conditions: landlessness, taxation, and political powerlessness. From a Marxist perspective, these groups should be natural allies. They share economic interests and they share oppression. But they never unite because religion becomes the dividing line. Judaism in Fiddler functions as a central ideology, organizing faith, marriage, community boundaries, and identity. This is most visible in Hava's marriage to Fiedka. Hava's choice to marry outside of her religion to a poor Christian farmer represents a threat to tradition, but also to ideological containment. Her marriage reveals that Jews and Christian peasants are not fundamentally different, but structurally similar, and had she not been shunned by her community, this could have been the starting steps towards an alliance between the impoverished Jews and Christians in the Pale. If they intermarried, they stop being separate moral groups and start looking like a shared class, which is productive for revolution and threatens the false consciousness.
However, I would be much happier if you would remain friends from a distance. You must not forget who you are and who that man is. As the good book says, each shall seek his own kind.
Instead of uniting against shared material oppression, their suffering is reframed as a sort of sacred endurance. Religion converts their shared economic struggle into separate cultural suffering, and the narrative changes from "we are all oppressed by the same system" to "we are Jews enduring oppression, and they are Christians enforcing it." Tevye's decision to disown Hava is tragic, but from a Marxist lens, it is both functional and predictable. Religion intervenes to preserve separation, preventing any horizontal class solidarity from happening. Tevye doesn't ever reflect on the system, he prays instead. He doesn't confront the institution, he instead negotiates with God. His religion provides him dignity and survival, but it also redirects his anger upward instead of outward. As Marx predicted, by separating suffering into religious identities, the system ensures that no unified opposition ever forms. Tevye's suffering and concerns with Hava are all boiled down to the idea that God is testing him, and this is a test for Jewish people explicitly, not all peasants in the Pale. While Fiddler on the Roof presents religion and the false consciousness in its traditional, spiritual form, The Great Gatsby reveals how capitalist ideology can replace religion altogether, assigning the American dream into a secular belief system that functions in the same way. The American dream operates as a false ideal, promising that wealth, happiness, and social mobility are attainable through individual effort alone. As Tyson explains, this belief encourages rugged individualism, convincing people that success or failure is a personal moral outcome rather than a systemic failure. In this way, the dream functions as ideology. It explains inequality without ever challenging capitalism itself. J. Gatsby is the most devoted believer in the secular religion. His entire life is structured around faith in the American dream, faith that money can redeem his modest past, transcend class boundaries, and grant him Daisy, who's the personification of old money and the American dream. Yet, Gatsby never questions the system that made Daisy unattainable in the first place. Instead of recognizing class rigidity, he internalizes this failure as personal insufficiency and doubles down on the belief instead of developing any class consciousness. Now, Nick Carraway, often read as the novel's moral center, ultimately reinforces this ideology instead of dismantling it. Although Nick does criticize the moral emptiness of East Egg elites throughout the book, he never questions the economic system that produces them. He condemns individuals, not capitalism as a whole. As a result, he mourns Gatsby's death and his failure as a personal miscalculation instead of a structural inevitability.
Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning, so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
The language here is unmistakably religious. The green light becomes an object of faith in the American dream, and Gatsby is a martyr. Like religion and Fiddler, the dream's legitimacy is increased with every instance of its failure. It sustains the idea of running faster tomorrow while preventing collective resistance or reflection of the system. Most importantly, the American dream causes isolation. Each character competes alone, convinced that success is individual and failure is also personal. This mirrors how religion in Fiddler prevents Jewish and Christian peasants from recognizing shared oppression. In both texts, ideology fragments the oppressed while leaving the system untouched. As Marx warned, belief is not the enemy, but when it replaces action, it becomes the most effective form of control. Thank you for visiting the Critical Theory Cafe.